Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today it is the 6th of October and we have a lot to talk about. Let's start off with Kherson, of course. And over here we have less news as both sides begin to regroup and prepare for the upcoming campaigns. But let's start out with what's going on in the southern part of the region. And we have reports from Lyubomirivka over here where both sides are talking about fighting each other in this area. The Ukrainian general staff reported a failed assault by the Russians on this town specifically, and then vice versa, because the Russians they reported a failed assault by the 59th Brigade on Ternovi Podi. So you do have a lot of clashes over here. The Russian sources do report that a lot of the 59th Brigade has been replenished right now, that it's receiving more ammo, and artillery companies are regrouping and replenishing their losses, and so you might see some sort of push over here in the next few days, which would sort of coincide with all the other Ukrainian plans for counterattacks in this area. So we also are talking about Ukrainian plans at taking Alexandrivka, and this makes a lot of sense if they're actually able to do so, because Alexandrivka, look at its significance. If you're able to actually take the town, then you could actually flank Stanislav, Shiroka Balka, Sofivka, and actually reach Tomina Balka, which is a very important town on the road to some of the other settlements that are very close to Kherson city itself. And so you could see another major breakthrough in this area. There are some VDV units stationed in this area, and so they may be able to put up a big defense. And just given the fact that Alexandrivka has been so contested for many months now, it's been going back and forth, and I can't even count how many times it's traded hands. So yeah, it will be difficult to take it, but I could see the significance of doing so and how it could actually change the course of the battle. And so you might see some sort of breakthrough over here. Perhaps they're going to try and push through these open fields over here because you don't really have as many fortifications in this area. Or maybe they just push through Alexandrivka, although this is very difficult because there are a few bottlenecks that sort of make attacking very difficult. Like this entire column, like an entire column could be destroyed if they tried to assault Alexandrivka head on by going through here. And that has happened in the past, and so I don't think they're going to repeat the same mistakes this time around. But we'll have to see. Now, let's talk about what's going on in the northern part of Kherson, where, again, you're just seeing a lot of the gains being consolidated. Ukraine is not even in all of these towns that I have marked as blue yet. I'm just marking it as blue because I know that Russia has already retreated from this area and that they're not going to re-enter it. So eventually Ukraine will make their way to there. The furthest south that I've seen Ukraine is actually over here in this pretty cool video where there was an engagement between the Russian rocket launcher, the BM-27, and a Ukrainian tank, and the BM-27 Uragan actually got destroyed. So you can watch the video over here. And so that sort of confirms that they're at least in Novokamyanka, but of course they're further south, just north of the new line around Milove and Borozhenske. So you do have now recon units from specifically the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade and 46th Air Mobile Brigade, and so they're trying to not necessarily break through just yet, but they are sort of doing these divergence reconnaissance missions, which are Ukraine is pretty famous for. They've been doing that a while on other front lines, and so they're just trying to go in and sort of get a gauge of what the Russian defenses are in this area. And so we're gonna have to look out for what they do. Meanwhile, you have the 60th Infantry Brigade that they're actually planning an attack on this area, and so whatever occurs here in the next few days is going to be interesting. They are really just starting to solidify their control right now over Piatikhatki, if I'm saying that correctly. And so once that's under their control, you can see a push towards Borozhenske. But for now, the situation is pretty stable. Meanwhile, around Davydiv Brid, the pro-Russian sources that I was reading reported that the Russians actually took back control of this forested belt area over here. I don't know if this is true, but it seems as if the Russians have refused to further withdraw, and that they're keeping their forward positions very close to Davydiv Brid in hopes of taking back the town at some point, if that is possible. Maybe they can, maybe it's a part of their plan to actually just get rid of this bridgehead entirely and force all the units in here to retreat further up north, and then there would just be a fully consolidated defensive line without a fear of being flanked from the west. But anyway, in this area, you have the 57th Brigade and the Ukrainian 57th Brigade. They're fighting pretty heavily right now. There's some pretty heavy clashes just to the south of Davydiv Brid, going back and forth, but no real changes that I can talk of. Now let's move on to the situation around Zaporizhia, and specifically around the Orkiv area, where I did make adjustments to the map based on both pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian maps, and I did realize that my map was sort of showing Russia very close to Orkiv, when in reality the line is more realistic like this, where they're really centered around Novopokrovka, Robotyne, Rokopani, and then of course Nestyryanka. And so it forms this sort of semicircle over here. This is their line of defense, and you have basically this no man's land in between Novodanilivka and Robotyne, where this is where you'd actually see the fighting between the 65th Mechanized Brigade of the AFU and whatever Russian units are in here. It's very hard to tell which Russian units are in here, but I will be looking for that in the future, especially if anything materializes on this front. And so there's actually a very large contingent of Ukrainian forces in this area, and there has been for since the beginning of this war, actually. A lot of them are in Zaporizhia, the city itself, but a lot of them are also spread out throughout the front line over here. Some are in like around Kamyanske, Shevchevaki, Orkiv, as I said, Huliaipoli, and they have the potential to actually go on the offensive now, and this has been discussed by many people on all sides, and so I'm very interested to see what ends up happening over here, because there are reports now that the 65th Brigade is having some troop rotations, and that they're actually replenishing their forces now, and that their recon units are beginning to operate in the Orkiv direction, trying to probe the Russian line of defense, and they're utilizing new drones, the Puma drones. I talked about this a few weeks ago, that it was happening around this area, and now it's being reported again, and so who knows what will end up happening over here. You do have sort of a bulge in the front line that is centered around Novodanilivka, and so if the 65th Brigade is able to find an opening, they can actually reach this very major city over here, Tokmak, which is important for all the coordination on the Zaporizhia line. And just like we saw in Kherson and in the Kharkiv fronts, there might be able to be another breakthrough over here, because Ukraine, I'm not sure if they have numerical superiority here, but they do have a large number of forces, and a lot of them have been trained by NATO. So these are not just like poorly equipped reservists. These are pretty well trained units that are pretty battle hardened, because they've been fighting in this area for many months now. The 65th Brigade has been in Orkiv since this new line around Zaporizhia was even formed in March. So they are very experienced at this point, and so they can actually inflict some serious damage if they go on the offensive over here. And their goal would probably be to reach Tokmak first, as I said, but then also advance on this road to Melitopol, which is the capital of Zaporizhia right now, at least according to the Russians' account. And then, of course, later on, they'd want to reach Berdyansk, which is a pretty major city, a port city, and it was captured on very early in the war by the Russians. And then, of course, the main prize is Mariupol, which would sort of disconnect the lines between the Russians in Zaporizhia and Kherson and the ones in Donetsk and Luhansk. And so that's sort of a very long-term plan from Ukraine, and that could only happen if they are able to push back the Russians around the Zaporizhia line right now, which is still dangerously close to Zaporizhia, although it's right now, 20 miles away. Still pretty close, though, within the range of shelling. You did have some strikes on the city itself last night, if I recall correctly, and so there is still a danger in this area. You also have the 43rd, 45th Artillery Brigades in this area. They're preparing for some large artillery duels in the coming days. So do look out for whatever happens in here. I am very interested to see if there's some renewed fighting in this area. Let's move on now to the Donetsk front right now, where we did actually have some changes and the Russians did make some gains over here. And so first of all, we now have confirmation that they are in Mykolaiivka. We have two geolocations from this guy who saved me a lot of time because I was going to look through and find the geolocations myself, but he did it for me. And so we have Wagner in Mykolaiivka and another one, which shows that they're in control of the entire town. And so this probably happened a while ago, but it seems as if the front line has shifted towards Odradivka. I did have the map as showing that Odradivka was contested with the Russians entrenched in the southern part of the town, but now it's being reported that they have fully taken over Odradivka. I am not too skeptical of this. It is possible that it's still contested, but it seems as if Ukraine is going to start withdrawing from this area because it's not a strategically advantageous position. Probably going closer to Opitny around this road over here. They could still retreat to this area. And all in all, Odradivka is not that important of a town. But I will mention what Russia could do now that they are in control of this area and that they do have a foothold on the main road to Bakhmut. So they can actually go towards the west and first of all break through this first line of hedgerows and trenches which has been constructed by the Ukrainians, and then reach this road over here around Andriivka. This will take some time because Ukraine does have several like echelons of forces and fortifications in each area, but once they break through the first two, then they can actually reach Klishivka and actually occupy that town. So Klishivka is interesting because it's really the only town in between. It's really the only town in between Odradivka and Ivanivske, and Ivanivske is basically a very important town. If the Ukrainians are forced to withdraw from Bakhmut, they would have to leave through this road if they want to like get to Chasiv Yar, for instance, or Kostiantynivka, and so they would have to go through Ivanivske. So if you have Russian groupings just to the south of it, they can actually attack it and sort of surround Bakhmut from several sides, just force them to retreat further north instead of to the west. So that is certainly a possibility, but it will be very difficult. Another possibility is that the Wagner troops over here, they just go further south in the direction of Zelenopilia, Diumivka, where you do have a grouping of Ukrainian forces that need to be dislodged in order to just secure all the environs of Bakhmut and of Toretsk in order for some future assaults on those cities, which is why you already have them in Mykolaiivka Druha, and they are fighting in the plains just to the east of it, and they're rapidly, well, not really rapidly, but every day they're advancing like a few hundred meters, I'd say, you know, towards these quarries over here. And so you might see some fighting reaching these three towns in the future. And in terms of Mayorsk, it's still under Ukrainian control, but if Orzaryanivka was to be taken, then from there, Mayorsk could sort of be attacked from the north. That's another thing to look at. Mayorsk is very heavily fortified. Zaitsev over here is still contested. Some sources say that it has fallen, but some are saying that it's contested, so I'm just going to keep it contested for now, but I do expect Ukraine to withdraw because, look, they're being attacked from all sides right now, and so they still have control of this road over here, which they can use to transport their troops and equipment out of the town safely, and then just get to Opitny, where there is a relative peace. And so that's what I expect to happen in the next few days. It's also being reported that Vesela Dolina has fallen. I'm not like too surprised because it's just a small village. Seems like a few families could live here and that's it. And so the fact that it took so long to take all these towns is pretty crazy. It does show, first of all, the tenacity of the Ukrainian fighters, and it does show how well fortified they built all of these areas over the past few years. Because really, I've been talking about Vesela Dolina and Zaitseve and the Vershina for months now, and only now are they actually being taken after a very long time. And I must add that really Wagner hasn't really received any reinforcements. In fact, they're just doing this on their own, void of what's going on outside of the Bakhmut sector, and so this is going to continue. They're probably going to push in right now to Ivanhrad, since they're only about a mile away, a mile and a half away. And right now, there's confirmation that they take in the asphalt plant, which is over here, I'll highlight it, and that there's fighting still in the industrial area. Ukraine is not going to withdraw just yet. They are holding the line over here for as long as possible to prevent a major Russian breakthrough. Also, in terms of the units that Ukraine has in this area, I looked through and I read that they have the 55th and 58th motorized brigades as well as the 93rd mechanized brigade. So I was confused about this because I had been saying for a while now the 93rd mechanized brigade was operating around Oskil. So maybe it is possible that like some of their battalions are in the Bakhmut area and then some of them are in the Oskil area. That's really possible. Also, the 128th Mountain Brigade was mentioned, which is pretty interesting because I had said that they were fighting in the Andrivka bridgehead and in northern Kherson, and so maybe they also have some companies in this area. They did fight in Kreminna when that was the battle going on in June or May, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's possible that some of their troops were moved around in the Donbass area. That's all certainly possible, but you do have a large grouping of Ukrainian forces in this area, and they are going to put up a big fight as Wagner approaches the city itself. Now, let's move on to Spirny, where I don't really have an update, but I do have to mention the importance of Spirny because Spirny is now being used by both sides as a staging ground. They want to use it to sort of solidify the front line and potentially advance further on. So, specifically Ukraine, if they're able to get full control of Spirny, which they basically have right now, they just need to take this like compression center or whatever. If they take this, then they're only about I'd say just 2 miles away from the Lysychansk oil refinery, and so this is really their goal at the moment. Meanwhile, the Russians want to hold the line over here, and they can do this by taking Spirny. You see there's sort of a bulge in the Ukrainian lines around Spirny, and so maybe the Wagner reinforcements that were sent over to this area can help O Group and just sort of like solidify the line. But for now, what I have to report is that there's just continued clashes in this area, and that you should look out for whatever happens in here. Now let's move on to the important line of fighting, which is around Kreminna, where really it's been quiet in terms of changes, but you do have a lot of artillery duels going on right now around Kreminna, Dibrova, all this area. You do have recon units operating in the forests, trying to get closer to Kreminna, and you have continued evacuations of the city and continued building the fortifications and continued reinforcements. All of that is going on right now. Besides that, there's not much to report on though, so that is status quo right now. Now, further north, we do have some updates. The Russians, they are preparing for battles around Svatove right now, and so there's also evacuations going on there. Interestingly, you have like the hospitals and the administrative buildings being evacuated in this area. A lot of residents are leaving in the direction of Russia proper, but also to like Starobilsk, where that would probably be another line of defense if Svatove falls. And so you are seeing a lot of fortifications being built around the high ground because they really don't want to give this area up, specifically the highway. If that area falls, and it's going to be very difficult for Russia to actually defend Svatove, and so they need to make sure that they have very good defensive fortifications in this area, because none of this area is fortified. The only thing in Russia's advantage right now is the terrain, if they can hold it, but if they lose it, then Ukraine, obviously, they have the major advantage. In terms of the two bridgeheads over the Oskil River, you have the 14th Brigade around Tavizhanka. They still have not been able to break through. It's been very difficult for them over here. And meanwhile, you have the 92nd Brigade operating around like Petropavlivka right now. So they're going to be sent in to help connect with the 14th Brigade so then they can work together to take Vilshana and also later on Kislivka. That is a very important town to take before Svatove is assaulted head on. But it does seem as if the Russians, at least in the northern part of the Oskil River, are trying to hold on right now, and they're not being dissuaded by the constant fighting. They're not withdrawing like they have been for the past month. So maybe that indicates that the Russians are actually going to try to hold on to the line, at least in the northern Oskil, not in the southern Oskil. They've already withdrawn from there. Or it just shows that they're buying some time before they have to withdraw to Troitske, because Troitske is an important supply hub for the Russians, so they probably want to keep the Ukrainians a safe distance away so it can't be shelled as much. But besides that, I don't really have anything else to say. Today was relatively calm in comparison to the past few days. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you later.